Welcome back to the Between Breaths podcast. I'm Jacko, your host, and I have a special guest as ever, Steph Magenta. Some of you will know her from Instagram as Integrated Breath. I've followed Steph's work for probably ever since I got into the whole breathing scene myself, so had been meaning to get her onto the podcast for quite a while. So very happy that we managed to get her on now. And Steph's got like a great outlook on healing and breathing as part of that. And to use her own words, she says she is ever curious in a quest to learn more about the human body, spirit, and psyche. She'd recently done the Oxygen Advantage instructor training to add that sort of skill set and understanding around the breath to her already comprehensive depth of knowledge that she possesses and shows. If anyone follows her on Instagram, you'll see that for yourself. So we had a very organic and natural conversation, and as I expected, hit it off. So I hope you enjoy listening in as much as I enjoyed speaking with Steph on the Between Breaths podcast. Now, before we get started with the actual show, just a reminder and a thank you to the Between Breaths podcast sponsors, HVMN, and particularly the Ketone IQ is the main product that I take from them. I've spoke a lot about how it's helped me with sleep, how it's great for brain health, and obviously that being an important part of my own journey. But I know that a number of you have been using the product now yourselves as well and enjoying that. And someone did actually ask me, someone was curious, asked like about the taste. What's the taste of this thing? And I think the best way to describe it is it tastes like it works. Meaning that you don't taste and go, oh, this is absolutely delicious, but you only have small little shots of it because it's very potent. And I like the fact that it tastes like that it works. You almost feel like it's doing something, even though obviously that it is in itself. And there's a ton of research that you can have a look into about how ketones help to cross the blood-brain barrier. It's a clean fuel source. I've been using it to help with my endurance training. Obviously, that Everesting attempt of Snowdon, not all of it. There was a lot of it fueled by a lot of other food and treats and things, but there was always some ketone IQ going into my drinks alongside my hydration drinks, which is LMNT. So if you're interested, you get a discount with the code Jacko, but if you go to the link hvmn.com/Jacko, that 20% discount will get automatically applied to your cart, so you don't have to mess about. And to make it really easy for you, I've put the link in the show notes too. All right, so that's enough of that. You've come to listen to me speaking mainly to, not mainly, I'm only speaking to her, but you're mainly coming to listen to Steph Magenta on the Between Breaths podcast. We enter this world taking our first breath, and sadly, we leave this place taking our last. And what I want to do with this podcast is to explore what happens between those breaths. I'm David Jackson, Jacko, and this is the Between Breaths podcast. Steph Magenta, welcome to the Between Breaths podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
I had someone else on recently where I was complimenting, or we wasted too much time talking about their name, but Magenta is, what a fabulous name. Is that a stage name, or is that?
Yeah, it's effectively a stage name. It's really interesting because somebody sent me an article from The Guardian at the beginning of the year saying apparently magenta is the colour of the year, and I was like, well, that'll do for me. Although I was using the name before that, I like to think that this year could be part of my year. Yeah.
No, I love it. I was my first question won't be what's your favourite colour. Just for some, you're doing fabulous work. There'll be a lot of people listening to this that are avid followers of yours on Instagram, but there might be a couple of people out there that maybe haven't come across your work and what you do. Just want to give a little introduction of yourself to someone that maybe hasn't come across you and your work so far, of what you're doing and how you got there.
Yeah, sure. I'll do my best to be succinct. I'm not known for being succinct, but I'll try.
No problem.
I guess from that point that you've just made about people who might not know my work, if they know your work, then they'll know the difference. So my work is more conscious, connected breath work, typically done through the mouth, Don't
Yeah.
advocate it on a day-to-day basis. Don't advocate it as a practice that's daily regular. It's more get people into the functional breathing of the
Yeah.
sort that you train people in so
Yeah.
that they learn how to breathe well. And I always say to people, it's better to see them as two completely separate practices because
Yeah.
mouth breathing and connected circular breath seems to have incredible results in bringing up all the stuff that's locked in the somatic library, in the
Right.
body, trauma, shock, grief, longing. We see animals go to water spots and shake off all of those moments where
Yeah.
their nervous system has gone into high levels of activation, and we don't. So we tend to almost eat our shock and our trauma. And then
Right.
when we breathe in this way, because there is a sympathetic activation involved, it brings it back up to the surface. It seems to switch off those default mode networks in the same way that psychedelics can,
Yeah.
and just allow people the space to feel what's in there. So, I mean, that's the fundamental part of what I do. I see it happening in TRE, which I'm training in at the moment as well. Like the body is incredible,
Yeah.
what it holds, what it keeps in there. And
Yeah.
well, you know yourself, I'm sure. We only need to start breathing well, and suddenly emotions come up and feelings come out. Oh God, what's wrong with me? I'm feeling really, and it's touching something inside. So yeah, my background is in addiction, shamanism, body work, but my passion now is in breath work.
Yeah. There's a couple of the somatic library. I love that phrase or notion. And just talk to us a little bit more about that, rather than sort of skimming over. What does that mean when you say that? And I'm interested to go into a little bit because there hasn't been anyone yet on the podcast talking in
Mm.
depth, with probably not with your type of experience, in depth of like, we say emotions come up to the surface, we say they're stored in the body, just to like have a bit of a conversation around what we think may be going on there for people to be able to understand it.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. Um, so one of the books that is the basis for our training is called The Body Keeps the Score, which I'm sure
Yeah.
you've heard of by
Yeah.
Bessel
Yeah.
van der Kolk. And the clue's in the title. This
Hmm.
is the somatic library, the body keeps the score. And then you look at people who are doing incredible work like Gabor Mate, in the realm of the hungry ghosts and the myth of normal. But they're all people who are finally starting to recognize that our lived experience builds up a kind of response profile that we have in the world. And so we start to learn, we become reactive rather than responsive because we're being
Right.
fired by those same kind of neurons that fired us originally, where we had unmet needs, we didn't feel safe. I mean, Gabor Mate says that the root of all addiction is in self-soothing, and that self-soothing comes from those unmet needs. Well,
Yeah.
where is that going to exist but for in the body? Because before we were verbal and before we knew how to make sense of the world, or before we had a sense of us having an identity, it was all in felt sense.
Yeah.
It was all in safety. I reach out, I'm cold, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I need food, I need my mother, I need my father, I need my caregiver. When those needs are not met, we start to subconsciously at first build up a sense of a lack of safety,
Right.
a lack of belonging. And of course that's kind of almost like the good bit, because really then if you start looking at the bits where there's actually kind of mentally, emotionally, physically, or other forms of abusive patterns within the family line and the family dynamic,
Yeah.
that gets passed down and it becomes part of our structure, our character structure.
Yeah. I love. Yeah. I've seen or listened to a lot of Gabor Mate sort of podcasts. I've not read any of his books actually.
Yeah.
Um, and anyone that hasn't come across, he's an amazing guy, and he's like just got a very his demeanor is I love it. Is if people haven't looked at his work, then watch some of his videos and listen to some of his podcasts.
Yeah.
So some people might be skeptical about, what do you mean, like um, trauma being passed down through generations? Is there anything more that you could say to someone that's
Mm.
a bit skeptical about that?
Oh my God, yeah. There is for the people who are
Because it's
skeptics.
look, it's a little bit, it's a little bit. It, it's not an obvious thing that people have probably come across. I don't think, and I came literally go something completely less. I remember when my first experience of someone suggested that I need to work on my breathing was when a physio, when I had a shoulder issue. They worked lower down the chain to my diaphragm, and they're like, "Gosh, your diaphragm's in all sorts of trouble. You need to do something in your breathing." And I just completely dismissed it. And that's quite an obvious connection of like kinetic chain, like that's a very obvious connection, and I completely dismissed it. And so I've come a long way in my understanding of like the body and all these different things, and I'm very much like I'm probably more accepting of anything than I'll probably accept it first before dismissing it and then trying to find out whether it's right. But so I'm not put off by things that might not seem traditional or might not seem um, so obvious, if that makes sense. But there might be people listening that are just like, hold on a minute, what? So like my great 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 grandfather had this, that, the other done to him, and I'm feeling some of that pain. Like, get out of town. What would you say to somebody that was in that place?
Well, the first thing I'd say, if I'm speaking to a skeptic, is that there is a lot of science-backed research now about intergenerational trauma, which is what it's called. So go to your friend Dr. Google, type it in, intergenerational trauma, and look at what's been researched and look at what's been shown. But what I would say is, you know, there's a separation in a way, because in the West we've become much more reliant on science, and
Yeah,
when science gets very rooted in proof, it becomes scientism. It's more of a dogma.
good.
Similarly, when mystics become too mystical, it's not accessible to other people. Or in our culture, we might go, oh, they're a bit of a space cadet, they're a bit woo-woo. Sometimes we're saying that because we're afraid either of the
Yeah,
science or the mysticism. For me, it's all about balance, It's
yeah,
about walking between the worlds, not assuming that we know everything. Because you look at these ancient spiritual traditions that have been
yeah,
going for a very long time
yeah,
in the East, and it's like working with energy centers, working with the body, looking at the way
yeah.
that we develop armoring. You talked about your diaphragm snap. I've got a really tight diaphragm. It's probably what brought me to breathwork. But it's no kind of some of those things are not new. So we look at things like family constellations, internal family systems, and some of these other practices that bridge these different worlds. Family constellations, let me give you an
Yeah.
example. I experienced this once in France many years ago, and it blew my tiny mind because I
Uh-huh.
was like, how is this working? And I won't go into the how it works, but the point being that if you imagine that you have a constellation almost like a mobile over a child's crib, and you've got something that happens in a family system, right? So maybe you've got grandparents, maybe you've got parents, maybe you've got children, descendants, aunts, uncles, siblings, blah, 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 blah. Somebody dies, something tragic happens, somebody kills somebody in terrible circumstances, or is sent to war and kills people and cannot look at that and cannot talk about that. And so we get this kind of miasm that starts to appear, which is like, when you're around that person, we don't talk about the war. We don't talk
Right.
about the first wife. We don't talk about the sibling who died. It's too painful, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so the people around that learn that there is something here that we cannot talk about, but I don't understand where, maybe you've lost a
Right.
sibling
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
young, and you know that there's an absence, and you know that your parents are different and they're grieving and they're sad and they're not
Right.
present for you anymore. That creates a follow-on
Yeah.
trauma in your experience. It's as
Yeah.
simple as that,
Wow. That
honestly,
makes a lot of
David.
sense. Yeah. No.
So that's, for me, that's the essence of generational trauma. It's the things that are passed on because the people who have been in those moments have not had either the resources, the awareness, or the support to be able to process difficult things. Because we all know as we move through life, difficult things happen. We can't
Yeah.
avoid them, nor should we. But if we
Yeah.
are resourced, and that's the difference in Gabor Mate's fundamental premise, which is trauma is not what happens to us, it's
Mm.
what we do with what happens to us and how we process
Yeah.
it. So the same person can experience, two people can experience the same trauma and have completely different responses according to how well resourced they are, how much
Yeah.
support they've got, how much capacity they've got to be able to talk about it, process it, digest
Yeah.
it, and move on. And
Yeah.
somebody who hasn't got that is going to have a very, very different experience, and it
Yeah.
might impact the rest of their lives.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it makes like Andrew Tracy talked a little bit about that in a slightly different way, but the same thing. One thing that's like already coming out to me is, and we share we share some very similar views. And what's interesting to me is what you said at the beginning of going almost what I do is the opposite of what you do when you're talking about the conscious connected breathing, yet I feel like we're speaking the same language. So one example being, um, or one thing just being there, like very rationally explaining something that I said someone could be skeptical about. It's like you made it simple, you made it rational. The other thing that jumped at me was, um, and I've not really heard it called this before, but you talked about we're very science based now, to the point where if someone says, and it's in Anchorman, the guy Ron Burgundy like jokes about it, like it's science. Like, so just if someone says, "Oh, it's science," that means that it means that it's science, and almost like what does even science mean? And you saying science turned into science? Did you say scientism?
Scientism. Mm.
Scientism? Because I see this a lot, and it gets my back up a little bit in that my background is in terms of my background, my education, if you say formal education of like at university, I studied engineering, a very scientific subject. And as part of that you have to do literature reviews and you have to do all of the blah 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 blah. I didn't enjoy it, and not necessarily enjoy it, but I like problem solving, but I didn't. The subject matter wasn't as enjoyable as what I do now, for example. But I did learn a lot about science and what is science and what isn't science within that. And what I see now too often is people calling something science, and they might even have a research paper behind them, and which someone would say, well, it must be science because it's a research paper. But what we see most often now is someone doing a study or a research project to prove something's right, and normally to prove they're right. That isn't science. Science is trying to understand. Science is not trying to prove that you're right. Um,
Mm.
and there's I'm gonna butcher his name, Carlos Ravioli or something like that. He's an Italian quantum physicist and philosopher. What a combination. He's got an amazing book that I've read, of all these different little just like short sort of stories and anecdotes. But he says something along the lines of in that of like, science is not the quest of being right about anything. It's just simply trying to understand. And I think that, yeah, there's a sentiment there that was shared with you of getting annoyed almost at people that we're saying something science, and we're almost hiding behind this mirage of like, oh, this is science over here, so it must be true, and this thing over here isn't science,
Yeah.
but it's been around for 10,000 years, but we can't possibly think that it's true because we haven't studied it.
Yeah.
um,
And that's dangerous, as you've said.
yeah.
The examples you've given are wonderful, because we only have to look at the history of science to know that things that have been proven have been disproven. And advances are made all the time
Yeah.
according to the knowledge that we gather and according to the depth or the deepening of the understanding that we have that we maybe didn't have. Just like, I mean, okay, I used to run juice bars. I was into nutrition. It used to fry my brain, and it still does, that there are people everywhere who go, coffee's bad for you, coffee's good for you, red wine's bad for you, red wine's good for you, salt is terrible. Oh, hang on a minute, salt is good, but it must be pink, or it must be this, or it must be that. And you can end up just in such a mess. And
Yeah.
everybody is different. And there are changes in the study of and the science of things according to, I love what you said there. It's like it's not about proving that I'm right. And half the time those studies have a vested interest because,
Yeah,
as you said, it
exactly.
might be, well, who's funded them? What's it for? Is it just that open inquiry? And I think the minute we start closing down to other possibilities, we're on dangerous territory and we're
Yeah.
becoming rigid in our thinking, rigid in our minds.
Yeah. Yeah.
I get that, some of this inquiry can be challenging for people, especially if it isn't their worldview. You've got a background in engineering. My background is in fine art. You know, that was my original thing. But
Oh,
then I've
brilliant.
I've meandered through all sorts of different paths, and the science is important to me,
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
important. We teach it as part of our breathwork training because it isn't just about getting people to open mouth breathe, because that's going to initiate some things happening in the body that they need to know about. They
Yeah.
need that to know what the contraindications for that kind of practice are. They
Yeah.
need to know what's happening when something starts arising and how to down regulate, up regulate, to bring people back through that emotional cycle of the nervous system. Even
Yeah.
if you're a scientist, we all can accept that we have a nervous system, we have a peripheral nervous system, a central nervous system,
Yeah.
and it's receiving information all the time from everywhere.
Yeah.
It's firing neurons, it's communicating messages.
Mm.
And you look at the development of the brain, and we work with that as well on our training, and again, for the scientists listening, they're like this, and I believe now there's new theories even about the triune brain. And I'm like, what? We've got this reptilian part that's the early part that is just responding to those things I talked about. Am I getting fed? Am I warm? Am I safe?
Yeah.
Is there a predator? Blah, blah, blah. Then we move to the limbic part and the emotional system, and how we find connection, how we find community, how we find that more subtle aspect of our beingness. And this prefrontal cortex doesn't come online and get fully developed till we're like 24 years old or something, 25 years old. So can
Is
you
it that
imagine?
late?
Yeah, it's really late. So we've got all this stuff firing in the background, and we can't, the central processing
No.
unit, oh, and I'm not sure what to do with that.
Ah.
Oh, there's some information, call it gut instinct, call it
Yeah.
primal knowing, call it intuition, call it what you want. But they
Yeah.
have to work together for us to be intelligent, functioning human beings, for us to work out that I'm not still in the war, I'm not still in the home environment that was
Yeah.
unsafe. I don't have to respond that way.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are just squashing all that down all the time, and that's what I like about the connected breath work.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm very glad that, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on to talk about this area, that you know it's something that classically some people might be like, oh, it's a bit woo woo. Yet you've just presenting it and explaining it, and also showing that, like, within your teaching, within your learning, it's based on science, if that's how you want to call it or describe it. But equally, there must be, um, are there some elements of the trauma release, or that, like, processing of trauma, that is fully, not quite fully understood, of what, like, it's like, we know, people report that, like, it's helping them deal with stuff and they're feeling better because of it. Do we know exactly what's going in there? I want to just steer us in that direction of going, what is, we talked about the somatic library.
Mm.
What, I don't know the I don't I almost don't even know the order to what it goes with. So sort of bear with me. Like, the first and simple one for people, of just, what are you, how regularly, sorry, would you work with someone on a, you talked about, like, the functional breathing side of things, and this, mouth breathing with the conscious breathing, it's, think of it as a separate practice.
Mm.
Is it something that someone would do daily or weekly, or what's the regularity that someone would, just for an easy question to start with, but useful for, well, maybe it's not easy, but useful for somebody that's maybe doing Wim Hof every day, and maybe not necessarily being in the right place. But let's not turn it into a Wim Hof conversation.
Yeah, let's
Um,
not. But I can answer your question based on that because okay, there's like, it's like there are many shades of the first thing I wanted to say was when you talked about the science there after what I'd just been saying, how I relate to that question is that we've got the biology, we've got the psychology, we've
Yeah.
got the physiology, and they're all working in partnership. You can call that science, you can call it the
Yeah.
merging of science and mystery, but they're all working together, like.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this like whole unit is like, well, here we are. If I breathe like this all the time, as in, or if I'm in high anxiety all the time and I'm taking shallow breaths and I'm never filling my lungs, or if my diaphragm's tight because, I don't trust in the world, my heart is closed, my body posture.
Yeah.
I've worked as a massage therapist.
Yeah.
You can read people, I'm sure you can too,
Yeah.
sometimes, not all the time, through their physiology, right?
Yeah.
So we're
Yeah.
getting messages all the time. Again, that's not new that people talk about body language.
Yeah.
So somebody could say to me, and if you're listening, you won't be able to see this, but I'm just demonstrating. Somebody could say, and you've probably all had this in your relationship with a partner goes, I'm fine, arms closed, tone of voice.
Never seen Mrs. Jacko do
She's cool.
that.
Mixed message. So when things start to come into alignment and what we feel is what we say, and we can risk bringing ourselves fully, then we can start to explore all these different practices for the different benefits they've got. To answer your question more specifically, many people came across my work when I ran a 21-day breathwork challenge about
Right.
3 or 4 years ago now. And I had 2 or 3 sessions every day, the majority of which were connected mouth breathing breathwork practices. At the end of that 21-day challenge, a guy, I won't name him, he knows who he is if he gets to hear this, but he came in at the end and he threw this, we had a panel discussion and he threw a proper cat amongst the pigeons because he suddenly just came out with this stuff about how mouth breathing every day was really bad for you and people shouldn't be doing it. And we were all sitting there on this panel going, oh, we've just done 21 days and people have joined lots of the sessions. And
Yeah.
anyway, I went off, spoke to him about that, did my own research, kind of just looked in more and more. And because we're all on a learning curve, right?
Yeah.
Since then, what I've learned is that if I were to do a 21-day breathwork experience again, and I'd probably call it that rather than challenge, I'm moving away from these combative kind of phrases,
Yeah. Yeah.
then I'd want to be mixing that up with people like yourself, people like Patrick McEwen, people who are doing the
Yeah.
potato breathing, people who use breathwork through meditation,
Yeah.
softer practices as well.
Yeah.
And something like Wim Hof, without going into Wim Hof, or Soma breath, or some of the other practices that do rounds of,
Yeah.
30 breaths of charging breath and then a breath hold. Well, straight away, what you're doing with those breath retentions is bringing your CO2 levels back up, right? Because you're not dispelling as much with a.
Wow. But interestingly, if you look at Cox's paper, CO2 levels not coming back up to where they were originally. So you're
No. So you're
diminishing
still
CO2 in the
diminished.
longer term. Yeah.
Right, thank you for that. Great. I'll bring you in onto my training as well. Oh, things to say about that. So, but in theory, again, that is different doing, several rounds of that, for example,
Yeah.
for increased performance and, whatever it is that people are doing it for, or activating DMT. I'm more
Yeah.
interested in the human condition than I am in
Yeah.
getting out of the body and
Yes.
going to escapist places. I think what we have to learn is how to be comfortable in these bodies, living an extraordinarily
Yeah.
ordinary life if we're
Yeah.
lucky.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
not, then we're typically dealing with stress and anxiety. These are the most common ailments of our time,
Yeah.
and they're growing rapidly.
Yeah.
So I suppose what I would now say to people is learn how to be with your breath in those functional ways. Learn how to self-regulate. Learn
Yeah.
how to bring your breathing pace down. Learn how to breathe through your nose.
Yeah.
Learn about what's important. Find
Yeah.
out, check your Bolt score, do your MBT test, do all the stuff that you do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if and when you choose to go, do you know what? I'm really aware that I've got some buried stuff here, because most people have, but we just
Yeah.
like to hide from it. And we've
Yeah.
developed all sorts of ways of hiding from it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Overworking, drinking, socializing, blah, blah, being
Yeah.
busy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then the open mouth breathing is fantastic. So I have regular one-to-one clients, but I don't see them more than once a week, and some of them I'll see them once every 2 weeks.
Right.
But once a week, no problem.
Yeah.
No problem. I've
Yeah.
got, but I also know some really good friends who are Buteyko practitioners who go, I wouldn't do that once a week. I don't think it's good for you at all.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
for me, it doesn't have to be an either or, it's an
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah. But once a week is very different to every day, for example. So I just wanted, yeah, for people to, um, one of the things I want to do with the podcast is to just allow people to get exposure to all different thought processes and ideas around how breathing influences us, our bodies, our
Mm.
minds, physically, mentally, emotionally, all these things. And so I do want to ask you about that concept of being comfortable in ourselves, that presentness and that, but just to finish off the sort of my little probing questions about the trauma release. In that, so you said someone might be like, okay, I've got to the point of awareness, rather than just being so busy that I don't have to deal with the thing that I've pushed to the back of my brain or whatever.
Mm.
You get to that point again, like I feel like I want something to do. I've maybe I've gone to see a therapist, talking therapy, and it didn't really work for me, or you don't want to do it, and you come across someone like yourself and you go, I'm going to try and do this. Are From your experience, your knowledge, or your understanding of it, are they just is the type of concentrated breathing opening up or exposing and bringing to the surface the trauma so we can process it, or do you believe it's actually allowing us to release it, or is it both?
Is that not the same thing?
Well, I was having a conversation with someone the other day that was making the point that, or in their mind, that it wasn't that they didn't believe that the work they were doing with someone to in this type of area. They were saying, I don't believe that the trauma is being released, because if, for example, I got beaten up in a car park, and it started off by like some lights flashing on the headlights and a horn going, chances are every time I get in a situation, if I'm in a dark place and the lights flash and a horn goes, I
Mm.
like, my body remember, and I'm a bit on edge because
Mm.
I'm remembering that. Like, and he says he was feeling like we get to process things, but if I get exposed back to that, my body still remembers
Mm.
those signaling. I'm
Mm.
just interested in different people's
Okay.
trains of thoughts on it, because it's probably not an area that it's not something that can you measure, can you scientifically study, like how much, you've now released 65% of your trauma. Next week we'll get it up to 75. We can't presumably say those types of things. So
We don't need to, though, do we, Jacko? Because, ultimately, why do we do all of this work? We do it to become better, more fuller versions of ourselves, to live happier lives, to be more
yeah,
fit, to be more content, to have longevity, whatever. People have got all sorts of reasons. And, I was talking about these default neural pathways before. So you just
yes,
gave a prime example of a situation where somebody might go, there's my trigger, there's my response. When we're getting into situations where we're activating the sympathetic nervous system a bit, but in a space that is held and facilitated with a knowledgeable person, or we're supporting ourselves, or we're able to resource, then we're creating small amounts of what we call hormetic stress, right? So
yeah,
suddenly we go, I am in a sympathetic nervous system activation. Everything's firing, as the body starts, like, the heartbeat increases, the palms go sweaty, the body becomes cold, the energy's drawn to the central core, getting you
yeah,
ready to either confront and fight or get away.
yeah,
When you don't do those things, but you're lying down in a connected breathwork session and you're not using the oxygen that's been additionally provided for you and everything else, something else starts to happen. And I've seen it over and over and over again in a breathwork session that people's bodies, just like they can in TRE, although there you're activating it intentionally by creating muscle strain and not
Right,
necessarily using the breath, but the body.
right.
And here we are talking about what we call bottom up approaches rather than top down.
Yeah, yeah,
If you're like me or any of your listeners like me, my mind is quick and it's clever and it's well defended and I can think my way and I can justify anything. I can use logic to get around something. Oh, this was my experience. But bring it into my body
mm,
and be willing to let go and the body starts doing what it needs to do. So I've seen over and over again that people go into spontaneous shaking and
yeah,
spontaneous responses that yes, the scientists will say, well, that is going to happen because this is what you're doing with the physiology.
yeah,
But a memory will come with it, an experience will come with it, tears will come out. And then somebody goes, oh, but I'm safe here. Oh, but I'm still
yeah,
alive. Oh, but I was able to say, get off me, or to do the things that they
yeah,
perhaps never had the opportunity to do, or to feel the feelings they never had the opportunity. Don't make a fuss. You're making a show of
yeah.
yourself. Blah 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 blah
Well,
blah.
you also, I think you said something about right at the start about maybe animals shaking off when they've been stressed, which is interesting because I'm reading Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now, and like just coming to the end of it. And literally, the bit that I read yesterday was him saying like about ducks fighting, and then like once they wandered off, they'd had their fight, they had a little like shake off and like physically get rid of potentially any sort of feelings that were inside. Whereas what we do is we go, and then you know, depending on where, I think different people's upbringings and cultures and things, you know, to a more or lesser degree,
Mm.
basically without telling us to, we sort of get taught to like, don't show that you're mad, don't show that you're angry, just don't hit out. And I'm not saying that we should hit out, but you very much get taught as a child to like suppress your emotions, do you not? And
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, that's and I should have said actually at the start, I've done two conscious connected breathing sessions with Jamie Clements,
Oh
breath
yeah,
coach.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
We've done two workshops together, and when he's done his bit, I've just taken part.
yeah,
And I wouldn't necessarily say I had. Now maybe one was you could probably call release of trauma. I won't go into what it is; it's quite personal.
yeah.
Um, but the second one was just like a magical experience of I was literally, now I can describe it as like I felt like me and the floor had become, I felt like I'd become part of the floor.
Mm,
And I literally was like, I'm so happy. Not happy is the wrong word. Content, maybe. I don't know if I've got the word for it, but something around like be I was content, I was happy, I was just like literally just lying there and feeling like I joined the floor.
mm,
And I almost didn't want to move and was a little bit like, if this is me for the rest of my life, just lying here, I'm good. Like that would be fine. It was, I mean, I've achieved literally nothing for the rest of my life, but it was almost like, it felt like an experience to me of teaching me that like just being is enough
mm,
and not to necessarily have to be like chasing productivity. That's a bit of a
mm,
thing of me. I like being productive,
mm,
but put too much emphasis probably on it. But it's a fine balance because, for example, us doing this podcast, someone's going to listen to it. It's potentially going to change the way they think about their breathing or change the way that which practices they engage in, and ultimately, I would expect this to be the start of a life changing journey for at least one person, which is beneficial for us to do. But there's, like you said, there's balance.
mm.
And for me, someone that was, you know, 5 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to sit still and do a breathing exercise because I just literally wouldn't think it was productive, couldn't sit still, you know,
Mm.
all those types of things. And I think for everyone, you've already said earlier about everyone's different and finding out what you need to do to create your balance
Yeah,
is something I would encourage people with.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Have you got a couple of minutes just to talk about presence?
Yeah,
What
sure.
that is means for you in your practice? I know we're a little short on time, but Just to finish off with that, because you alluded to this at the start, and I think from what I've just described is a little bit of experiencing that, right?
Absolutely, because it's like that experience that you just described is like you could say initially, well, we don't have the science to explain that kind of feeling. It's a feeling state.
Yeah.
You could find some science, doubtless, as in measuring your heart rate variability, measuring your brain
Yeah.
waves. You know, if you were wired up to things, yes, you could find some science to support the feeling.
Yeah.
But ultimately, that feeling of kind of what, as you described, it sounded to me like oneness and peace and contentment.
Yes.
It's like,
Yeah.
you know, brilliant, wonderful, lovely. Oh, that's a nice feeling. I like that. Yeah, I wonder if I'll find it again. I'm not overly attached if I don't. It's a good thing not to be attached to these states. I think we get very attached to experiencing life through drama, pain, and suffering.
Yeah.
And I've had some of the biggest breakthroughs in a connected breathwork session where nothing much has seemingly happened, and then right at the end a little tear has fallen from my eye and I've released a memory that's been painful that I've been carrying for years. And you talked before about, well, how do we know it's made a difference? Well, the next time that memory came up, all of a sudden it didn't rack me with guilt. All of a sudden I was compassionate with myself. It didn't have a grip on me. It didn't have hold over me. So the thing about presence, it's interesting, you know, I just had a consultation with a prospective student before, and he had a lot of great questions.
Yeah.
And he was like, well, I've noticed that breathwork facilitators use this kind of particular voice when they're speaking, and will I be able to develop that voice, and will I be able to guide people, because I don't feel very good at it. And I
Oh,
said,
he wants to learn to be a coach with you rather than or a facilitator rather than be a
yeah. He wants to
okay.
learn to be a
Right,
facilitator,
okay.
and he's not sure he can do it. And I'm not going to use any names or anything, and I said to him, listen, you know, all of this is just the BS that we get. Yes, you need vocal tone, because are people going to engage with somebody who speaks like this and says, take a deep breath and just see what you're feeling? No. But you don't have to be anybody other than who you are, because
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
greatest gift you can give to another human being, whether it's you and I on this podcast,
Yeah.
whether it's me and somebody else, whether it's me and the postman when I open the door and take the letters in, is presence.
Yeah.
And I said to him, you know, like we've had Scousers go through our training that people can't even understand sometimes. Where my American co-teacher should be
Yeah,
like,
but
what did he just say? And they lead breath work, and they're super popular, and they're doing it well, but they're beautiful, beautiful men in this case that I'm talking about, who are so present and so in their hearts and so
yeah.
available to themselves and to another, that I can teach people all the science, and I can teach people all the knowledge and the information about breath, and I can teach people how to use vocal range, and I can teach people whatever. But if I'm not present to that person in that heart to heart human connection way, there's no healing that's going to happen. There might be some, actually. I won't be quite so dismissive that there's no healing, but there certainly wouldn't be so much. And I think that for me, that's the anchor point of all of my work, and also is the meeting point of science and mystery, because we are in a human body, we're having a human experience, so of course, you know, we are present to that. I don't know what your lived experience is like. I don't know what your belief systems are. I don't know what you believe about yourself, your world, your partner, your job, your anything else.
Yeah.
All I can do is be open to listen. And another thing, you mentioned it earlier, I wanted to come back to this, is, you know, when the way that I work is, if I'm working with somebody who's come to breathe, I'm not there to diagnose them. I'm not there to fix them. I'm not there to heal them. I'm not there to teach them. I'm there to hold some kind of space available for them to go in and find what's in there for themselves and just receive that. And that's the quality of presence I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Because they might say, well, this just happened, what does that mean? And then I might be able to give them a scientific answer, you know, well, maybe you began to shake because of XYZ, or maybe not, you know, maybe it's something else in there. How does it feel for you?
Yeah.
You know, and I think when we get into diagnostics, I'm not a doctor, you know, and doctors get it wrong, as we know. And many of them are not trained in, you know, how we are impacted by sleep, by nutrition, by breathing, by all of that stuff anyway.
Yeah.
but you could call them scientists.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think the thing you're talking about with the presence and holding that space for someone, um, for me, the word that comes out is like connection,
Yeah.
where, you know, there's a lot of let- we can probably say it's science as well, but theories or whatever, but just that we as people and humans, we are connected. We've potentially come from the same source, and the one thing we know that we seek is we seek connection, but sometimes we don't know how to do it, or we find it in the wrong places, or yeah, it just becomes a bit muddled up. But we know when we get that real connection with someone, the thing that you know is it feels right. And I think that
Mm.
when it's right, it's right. And something I'm taking from this conversation personally is like, um, yes, the science is great, and I love the science and all that, but there's an encouragement to whether you've realized you were doing it or not. But there's an encouragement to me around that trusting like what you think, what you believe, what you know is right. Um,
Mm.
yeah, which you may not have realized that that's what you were doing, but that's what it's definitely part of that for me. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. And there is still science in that, in exactly what you've just said, and it's all there in polyvagal
Yeah.
theory. It's like, oh, okay, when
There's
I
some
feel connected, I'm in ventral vagal, I feel
yeah,
safe, I feel secure, I feel supported, I feel comfortable, my nervous system isn't in activation.
yeah,
Oh, there's that flashing light you talked about. Something's happening over there. I can hear an argument in the room next
yeah,
door. My sympathetic nervous system starts to activate. That sound is coming closer, it's coming closer, it's coming closer. It's in the room, shit, I can't get away.
yeah,
I might go into a freeze state. I might go into a shutdown state. I
yeah,
have to protect myself. And like, and animals are doing it too. We're mammals, you know.
yeah.
They just don't have the houses, the jobs, the families, the responsibilities, and all the rest. Well, they probably do have the families.
It almost
They've got
sound
the pack.
it almost sounds easier, doesn't it, for them?
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
some
Go and
wicked.
shake it off and have a big chill out.
I don't know. My wife was doing a course with Chris Gresser in the Gresser Institute. I don't know if you've come across his work in functional medicine, but I don't know if it was like a meditation teacher or mindfulness practice, but Forrest Fines, I think his name was. But he was quoting some research. I can't remember who it was from, so I need to potentially have to Google it. But around like gut instinct,
Yeah,
in literally that they've like got they've studied it. They've got studies to show that like it's an act like your instinct and your gut feeling and your intuition, like it is a thing. Like a lot of people would be like, yeah, no, I know it's a thing because I can give you examples of when it's like served me correctly. But there'll be
mm,
other people that are very skeptical about it, and then they've got some like hard data and studies to show that like it is a real thing. Um,
yeah. Well,
I,
the vagus nerve goes through the gut, and it's like
then it
it's
sounds obvious, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah, yeah. But anyway, I think the thing that I've taken from this is like, that it's not necessarily all roads lead to Rome, but it's kind of like that there's many, many, many fantastic practices out there, and there are a range of people delivering those. Some are amazing, some are less amazing, but I just say to people, find your resonance, start exploring there. It doesn't have to be one or the other. Somebody could come and do some work with you around functional breathing and Buteyko and sports performance and, increasing XYZ. And at the same time, they might go, oh, yeah, and I want to go and work with Steph or whoever else,
Yeah,
Jamie,
yeah,
for example, and, look at my inner world and explore what's going on there with my emotions and my feelings, or or,
yeah,
or I'm just curious. We get
yeah,
all sorts of people come to it. We get psychonauts and adventurers, people that have spent years ingesting plant medicines, and that was one of the big turnaround points for me. It was like, oh my God, that I can feel those feelings that are only on a parter when I have worked with plant medicines before, and
right,
still be in my body and still be in my awareness and my breath, and the integration was therefore a lot easier.
yeah. If
So yeah.
no stuff fabulous, and if people want to know a little bit more about you, if they don't follow you yet, if they want to find out what you're doing, how they can learn from you or with you or work with you, where's the best place to direct them?
Well, they can start at my website, stephmagenta.com, or they can go to integrative-breath.com. And those are the two places that at the beginning. And also, I'm connected with you already on Instagram
Yeah,
at integrative breath. So many people can't say that or spell that. So
integrative benefit. I'll put the link in the show notes so people can just literally click towards them. So if you're dyslexic like me, don't worry, you don't have to type it out. You can just
oh, bless
we'll put the link in
you.
the show notes. No, Steph, once again, thank you so much for being on the Between Breaths podcast. Yeah, I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Yeah, likewise. I'll have to get you on mine.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Thank you for the invitation.
Right, take care. If you haven't either give us any feedback or reviewed the podcast, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love you to do a little review wherever you listen to the podcast, whether it's iTunes, Spotify, wherever else. And really appreciate the support of the podcast. It helps it to grow. It helps us to get more guests on. And if you have any recommendations or people you would like to see come on as a guest, please do get in touch. You can either message me on Instagram, jacko.david.jackson, or you can drop me an email at david.jackson@oxygenadvantage.com. So thanks for listening. I've been breathing. No, you've been breathing. I don't even know my own tagline. You've been breathing. I've been listening. Until next time. What am I actually? I didn't even say that, did I? You've been breathing. I can't even remember what it is now. What is it? You've been listening. I've been breathing. No? Until next time, we'll keep it nasal. I need to stop having breaks in between these podcasts. It's something like that. It definitely finishes with keep it nasal.